But first of all, I want to talk to Marion Jenkins, who is a councillor for Mere Green Ward in Birmingham for the Conservatives, and also Mark Devlin from Scotland, who is a founder of The Majority, which is a movement which is which is anti-independence, and it's a voice, he says, for Scotland's anti-nationalist majority. Mark, maybe I can start with you in Scotland. Why do you think devolution hasn't worked? This can't just be about the SNP, because of course Labour were in power, the Lib Dems as well, the Greens have been in power. A lot of different parties have been in power in Scotland over the last 25 years since devolution was brought in. So what is your broad view of devolution there?
Well, I think we've had 25 years of this experiment of devolution, and what has it given Scots? Do they feel closer to government or further away? And I think many Scots now feel that the administration in Edinburgh is actually more remote than the one in Westminster, because basically its priorities are not aligned with the Scottish people. We have for example, Humza Yousaf pretending to be the First Minister of Gaza instead of being the First Minister of Scotland, and dealing with issues that are entirely out of his remit. Most Scots just simply want local government to empty the bins and provide local services, and we don't really need to have this parallel government fighting with the UK government all the time, and when we want our bins emptied.
It's interesting, we've had a number of people in touch. Max says devolution has taken the United out of the United Kingdom. Whoever thought that was a good idea? Oh right, it was Labour along with open borders. Let's grovel to the EU. I mean, there are quite a lot of people who will say that, and previously, I mean, the argument for devolution, certainly in Scotland, was that it would kill nationalism stone dead. Those were the words, I think, of either Gordon Brown or Donald Dewar. You'll correct me on that. But certainly that hasn't happened.
Oh, of course it hasn't happened. It's basically lit a bonfire under nationalism and let it increase more and more. And the problem is that the UK government has basically appeased every aspect of nationalist politicians. It's given them every single thing they want, up to and including a referendum on breaking up the UK, right? So, and they still aren't happy. Even after the referendum, the very next day they started again. So basically, I'm not against devolution at all. I think getting power down to local authorities and local people is a great thing. But the Scottish Parliament has created a new body which is basically a centralised power and tried to grab power away from local authorities. Also has made power grabs against the Westminster government, and it has a whole host of other issues that we can probably go on to in the show.
Yeah, of course, and we'll talk about that. On devolution, Lorraine in Lancaster has been in touch and says, Peter, if you want to see devolution in action, come to Wales. Under Labour, Welsh people have had the worst national health system, the worst education system, and a blanket 20-mile-an-hour ban forced upon us, with over 500,000 people signing a petition, which Labour refused to debate. Welcome to Wales. Let's go to England now. Birmingham Conservative councillor Marion Jenkins is there, perhaps with a slightly more Welsh name than an English name, Marion, if you don't mind me saying so. What do you think about devolution for England?
Yes, I was born and grew up in Wales, but I've lived in Birmingham since I went to university. I think Mark has well expressed many of the frustrations that people feel about devolution. I think in principle, devolution is a good idea. The idea that you can move power to the voters by taking it away from what is a very centralised administration that we have in the UK. And I think the good thing is that it gives voters power to engage in regulatory arbitrage or tax competition in the way that we see, for example, if you look at the US, businesses and individuals are moving from California to Texas because they're moving from a high regulation state to a low regulation, low tax state. And I think if we can give voters that sort of power through devolution, it's a very good thing. But something else has to come with it. The first point is that devolution has to be a reason to reduce the size of the state, not to increase it. I mean, for example, since I've been a councillor in Birmingham, we've seen 2 extra levels of government added in the West Midlands, both of which have the potential to raise taxes. But have we seen a tax increase decrease from Westminster? No, taxes have continued to go up, and we're now at the highest level of taxes that we've seen for 70 years. So we've added 2 levels of government, 2 levels of government that could increase taxes, but the same level of tax and bureaucracy from Westminster. I think that the point about devolution is it has to be an opportunity to reduce the size of the state.
But surely devolution would by itself increase the size of the state, because you will have, by its very nature, more elected representatives, you'll have more civil servants who work, and so on. I mean, is there a form of devolution that can actually reduce the size of the state? And actually, what should England, in an ideal world, do you think England should have its own parliament? Should there be this system, which seems to be quite piecemeal, of having directly elected mayors for some areas but not other areas? Some people have, I just think a lot of people will go in to a polling booth and think, what am I actually voting for here? We've got parish councillors, county councillors, district councillors, city councillors sometimes, directly elected mayors, MPs. There's a lot of government, isn't there, Myriam? But what's the best system?
There's a huge amount of overlap. And I think what's really important to make it work is that there has to be a direct relationship between those who elect and those who pay the taxes. And each administration that spends money should raise that money locally. I mean, if you look, for example, at the financial train crash that we've had in Birmingham, 80% of Birmingham's income comes from central government. Only 20% comes from local taxpayers.
This is the council, just for people who won't know exactly what you're referring to there, Marion. This is the absolute financial devastation, the bankruptcy essentially of Birmingham Council, which has been badly mismanaged. There've been all sorts of factors in terms of equal pay, disputes and so on, and compensation that's had to be paid to people, and they're in dire financial straits, aren't they?
Oh, they're bankrupt. They're bankrupt, Peter. But it's not just Birmingham where we've seen a particularly bad example of failure, but also many of your listeners have referred to Wales, which has introduced some really strange policies, the 20-mile-an-hour limit, the way they handled the COVID crisis. But we're in a situation where Wales is not financially self-sufficient. Wales is subsidised by English taxpayers. And my argument would be that if we're going to devolve powers to Wales, then there should be a commensurate reduction in administration in Westminster, a reduction in the tax levied centrally, because people would pay tax in Wales. But also in that situation, there's then a direct linkage between those who pay tax in Wales and those who vote in the Welsh government. And therefore, we're not in a situation where the Welsh government can go off and do all these really strange and zany things, because it's being subsidised by English taxpayers.
Let's ask that question to a Scot, Mark Devlin, who's in Scotland founder of the Majority. Mark, what do you think of this aspect of the fact that Scottish people receive, I think it's the highest per capita as citizens right across the United Kingdom from Westminster, yet if you listen to the SNP, there's never enough money, Westminster's always in the way, and the SNP always have the right answer to every question?
Well, of course, that's completely correct. But I do, except I think actually Northern Ireland gets a bigger subsidy than.
It depends how you look at it, but yeah, okay. I think per capita Scotland is the
so
leader.
I mean, basically we have this situation as exactly you outlined, where the UK government is providing a subsidy to every single Scot, around about £2,000 or more pounds to every single Scot. And the SNP are still not happy because you can't appease them. That's the problem. You can try to appease them, but they'll just want more and more and more all the time. And then they'll say that they're doing that for Scots, when in fact they're spending the money on their pet projects. We have situations in Scotland right now where the central Scottish government is withholding cash from local authorities, while at the same, so the local authorities are starved of cash that is actually coming from the UK government, and then they are assigning what they call national priorities to the local governments. Like, for example, you must build bike lanes, or you must do other things. And these local authorities are saying, well, wait a minute, we need to hire teachers and provide services. We don't really need these bike lanes, but we'd rather put the money into that. But because the Greens in Scotland are wagging the tail of the SNP, we get this situation where Green priorities are more important than local priorities.
But in a sense, that's a political issue. Because, well, I mean, this is all political, but that's a political issue in terms of the electoral mathematics and the fact that they are being sort of slightly propped up by the Green Party. But in terms of devolution itself, is that actually relevant?
Well, I think the issue here really is that you've got, when you make any organisation, any political organisation, of course, what it wants to do is increase its own power at the expense of any other organisation around it. And that's what we've seen with the Scottish Government. Okay. Scottish Government is pulling power away from local authorities, centralising the power, in fact, almost centralising the power in one person, the First Minister, basically. And then the local authorities are like, well, what can we do? And some local authorities are now considering talking with Westminster directly to bypass the funding from the Scottish
I want to talk to Marion about this again in regard to England itself. So